In just a moment, give you 2 minutes for some opening remarks. We've got 7 questions. You'll have 3 minutes each. We've got some timer cards right over here, so we'll keep you on pace with that, and you'll have 2 minutes for a closing statement.
Perfect. Thank you.
Alrighty. So, Bob, please, the floor is yours, and feel free to say what you will.
It's a deal. First, thanks, Larry, and thanks to all of you for coming out today on a day off. And I know many of you have traveled some distance to be here, so thanks for doing that. I really appreciate it. And even more important, thanks for all that you do for the people of the state generally, and for obviously our kids specifically. It means a lot to me and my family, and to the people of the state. Just a couple things in the 2 minutes I have. Maybe the first thing I'd want to say is that over the course of, I think, a few months, Larry, right, I've had a chance, and it might have been your suggestion, I've kind of forgotten, was to get around the state and talk to you in different communities all across the state, and sort of informal conversations from Starbucks to labor halls to wherever it might be. And I've just really enjoyed those conversations. I know some of you who I met with are in the room today. And so thanks for taking time there as well. And I mention that in part because, as an attorney general, and before that being on the King County Council, I don't have some expertise on education policy, right? That's not part of the job description being the attorney general. And I know when I became attorney general, I'm a lawyer. I've got a lot of experience as a lawyer. And even then, I had an awful lot to learn once I became attorney general about the office and what we do. So when it comes to policy around education issues, look, I've got a lot to learn, and you've helped me learn a lot that process. Larry and his team has helped as well. And we were chatting in a side room, and I'm hoping after this process that if it works for folks, that I can continue having those conversations with different folks around the state, because I feel it's really helped me as well in this process. And then lastly, in the time that I have left, what I want to say is that one thing you sort of alluded to this, and as Attorney General, one thing I tried hard to do was change the culture of the Office of Attorney General, which is a great law firm for the state, but frankly, we didn't do a great job being a law firm for the people, okay? So as an example, if you called our office of 800 lawyers, okay, and 1,000 professional staff with a civil rights complaint, we referred you somewhere else. We didn't do that work at all. No civil rights work at all. Kind of crazy, right? If you want us to do an environmental enforcement case on behalf of the state, nope, call Department of Ecology. We don't do that. We did not use our own independent authority to act on behalf of the people. Take on a federal administration, violating your rights, forget about it. We had no team that could even dream of doing that. So I said about trying to change that. That made no sense to me. We should be centering you, the people, in the work that we do. Well, honestly, when I look at the state as a whole, and we'll get to specific issues, right, which I'll be interested in, but I want to share with you that when I look at the state as a whole, I see sometimes that same lack of focus on people. That the same lack of focus of too much bureaucracy, too much industry capture that goes on at the state, in the same way that even a high-functioning office like the AG's office was not fulfilling, I think, its core mission of serving the people. And so I look forward to the questions that all of you have. I'll do my best to answer, and look forward to hopefully future conversations as well in the coming months. Thanks.
All right, thanks, Bob. So we reached out over the last several weeks to our members and said we're going to have this endorsement forum, and please, what questions would you like to ask? And there's certainly certain themes that emerge, but all of these questions have come from WEA members across the state. And the first one is related to special education. And it comes from Gloria Smith, who's a WEA retired member and former Evergreen Education Association member down in Vancouver. And the question is, funding for special education falls far short of providing the support students need. How will you help to improve special education in our state?
So first, Gloria, by the way, is Gloria here?
Gloria is not here.
Okay, gotcha. Okay, cool. So first, Gloria, thanks for the question. And before I answer, one thing I neglected to say in my opening statement, which I should have said, was when I drove in, there were folks out there waving Ferguson yard signs, and I was in the middle of an intense work call, and I just saw a group of people, and I wasn't sure what was going on. It was only after I drove past you I realized you're out there standing with yard signs. So thank you for doing that. I just felt bad that I couldn't get off the phone from us. So anyway, thank you. But to the question with Gloria, so I think I might have mentioned in my first 2 minutes that my mom, who unfortunately recently passed away, she had a very long life, but she's a retired special education teacher, and so. I just will say that I'm one of 7 kids. Back when we were a family, we had dinner together every night. The children and the parents had dinner, and my mom would talk every day about her experience in the classroom, right? And just the challenges she had in the classroom as a special education teacher for many, many years. And so that's obviously formative on all of us. I agree with everything that was put in that question, that the state is not doing, I think the words were sort of not nearly enough to adequately let alone fully fund special education. So that is something I've heard across the state as well from many of you. And as governor, a power the governor has, as you know, is reflected in the governor proposing a budget, right? And then working with the legislature to adopt a budget and having a veto ability if that budget does not represent what the governor wants to do or direction the governor wants to go. So to answer the question specifically, yes, I embrace the duty that the governor has to work with the legislature and all of you in proposing a budget that does fully fund special education. And we're talking large sums of money, right? This is hundreds and hundreds of millions of dollars. But we know that's so important so that those kids have the same access to an adequate education that all kids deserve. And that is something that as governor, I intend to fulfill using the tools that I have on the budget process to make sure we do it.
Thank you. Our second question, Bob, is related to ESP wages. Our ESPs are our classified employees, non-certificated employees. And this comes from Pam Johnson. She's a member of the Grand Coulee Dam Education Association, and she's a high school English and language arts teacher at Lake Roosevelt Junior Senior High School. Many of our members are classroom teachers, but others are in very low wage positions, bus drivers, paraeducators, building services, and other education support professionals. They often must make ends meet with things like second jobs and EBT benefits. How would you help to change that?
So thanks for the question, Pam. Pam's not in the room, by the way?
Pam is not in the room.
Okay, cool. So thanks for the question. Another thing I heard frequently all across the state. So number one, I will say, I don't know if surprise is the right word, but maybe I was surprised by how bad the situation was for so many of your members. The second jobs, or leaving a job they love, serving, right, our kids, to take a different job that pays better, but that's not where their passion is, right? Their passion is a job they have in the school, helping kids in all the different ways that members do, but feeling that they just can't, right, make ends meet with that job. That, look, as a state, that is a moral failing for the state if we've reached that point for those folks. So what I would say is that as governor, to get to the question, the key is to make sure we are putting the resources there so that individual isn't making that choice, right, of saying, hey, I need to leave for a job that pays better, even though my passion is with these kids. And that seems like a basic duty of the state. One thing I will say in the time that I have is that the commitment you'd also have for me, Larry, is that to be personally engaged in that issue. And just to give you an example, these things are always different, but when I became Attorney General in 2013, I mentioned we have a lot of lawyers in our office, right? And the pay for those lawyers relative to other public service law firms was very low. So a first-year attorney made $50,000, a fifth-year attorney made $50,000. It was terrible for morale in our office. Our attrition rate was terrible. Lawyers didn't leave for private practice. That wasn't where they wanted to do public service. They went to public law firms, right? Kitsap County prosecutors, they got a big pay raise. Well, that was bad for our office, bad for our clients, bad for the people. So look, I got very personally involved in that, in changing that. I spent a lot of time figuring out our budget, where we could use resources in the budget to direct to salaries, what tools I had as Attorney General to change that. And now we've changed that completely. Fundamentally made dramatic changes in salary for those folks who I could see, hey, they were working hard on behalf of the people, but they were leaving the office not because they didn't love the work, not because they didn't love public service. There's better opportunities elsewhere. And so I think that same approach will be necessary to be personally engaged on those issues, because what I'm hearing from that question and from so many others across the state, it's unacceptable. You know, honestly, it really is unacceptable. And I look forward to working with you and your members on changing that.
Thanks, Bob. The third question relates to student behavior and trauma, and this comes from Rochelle Brown. She's a member of the Kennewick Education Association, and she's a reading specialist at Edison Elementary, and not in the room.
Okay, thank you.
I'll let you know. There are some. I'll let you know when we've got someone in the room.
Good deal. All right.
One of educators' top concerns is student trauma and the resulting behavior issues, such as serious outbursts at school, disruptive classroom environments, room clears, which are situations where other students need to be removed from a classroom, and injuries to both students and staff. How would you help us respond to the behavioral crisis in schools?
So thanks for that question. If I had to say what I heard most frequently from all the conversations I had around the state, this would certainly be number one. That I heard the most consistently and the most time was spent. I think this would be number one that I heard. Number two, also a strong sense from those conversations that this issue is getting worse, right? It's just been it's not like it's a COVID thing that, okay, now it's under control and things are getting better. And I'm seeing a lot of nodding heads as I say this, right? So it's not like it's COVID, it's getting better, which I think what I heard a lot was that seems to be a perception out there, right? From sorry, I got a yes, which is even very, so from policymakers that, yeah, it's going to get better, right? Look, some things from COVID were caused by COVID, some things are getting made from COVID, but I heard loud and clear, this is not one of them, right? That things continue to get worse. So number one, I think to address that, Larry, right, is the governor has a lot of authority, but the governor is one of many, right? You've got a legislature, resources. I think number one is making sure that all those policymakers as well understand what I've learned, right? Which is this is not going away on its own. It's not going to get better on its own. It'll improve with investments by the state, by those legislators and other decision makers understanding the depths of this challenge, by visiting classrooms and seeing what's going on in the classrooms and in the schools and the challenges we're having there. Specifically, hey, more counselors, more individuals, right, at the staffing level who can address this and help out. And by the way, system-wide across our state, right? Not just strictly in the classrooms, obviously in the education setting, but having the facilities which we are utterly lacking across the spectrum when it comes to mental health issues, chemical dependency issues, you name it, that whole spectrum, we are woefully under-resourced as a state on all those issues. And so, again, I think many of these questions come down to making sure that as a state, we are prioritizing investments in this way. And from my standpoint at a high level, that there is no more important investment as a state, right? No greater investment as a state than investing in a better environment for our kids, right? And all these questions go to the different ways in which that is impacted by a lack of resources at that level. Thanks.
Good response. You did well.
Well, but I really do. I mean, I believe. Sorry, I shouldn't jump in to add, but I mean, I do think that. I talk to a lot of legislators, of course. I do think that legislators, it's kind of like where I was, right? Think it's going to get better on its own. I really believe that is a challenge on addressing the changes that need to get made. So looking forward to working with all of you on communicating, attending meetings with legislators, whatever we can do together to make that happen. I think that is a really necessary step.
Thanks, Bob. Yeah. The fourth question relates to racial and social justice. Mm-hmm. At WEA, we believe that every student in Washington deserves a safe and welcoming school environment. What are your plans to combat racism and discrimination against LGBTQIA+, transgender, and non-binary students and staff?
Well, first, I appreciate that this is one of the, I think there's only 7 questions today, so I appreciate that this is one of them. Number 2, I think that the big believer that the best, especially in politics, right, but in general in life, that the best indicator of future performance is past performance. I just really believe that. And so I think I mentioned at the outset in our office, creating a civil rights division, right, which is now, by any fair measure, the best civil rights division in the country. If you polled all the AGs around the country and asked which civil rights division is the best in the country, I have zero doubt they'd say Washington State. And a huge part of why I wanted to create that civil rights division gets to at the state level, right, racial justice and social justice for all Washingtonians, right? And so my team does incredible work now, and I mean, you name the issues, incredible work on bringing cases on behalf of Washingtonians against those who are violating their civil rights, right, and not having that racial justice for Washingtonians. So as a governor, what I would want to do is bring that same approach and same focus. This matters to me on a personal level, right? That we bring this as a priority for the state. It was important to me as an Attorney General to change our culture of our office to address these issues, which we did not before, and making sure that that is an approach we are taking in the classroom. Look forward to working with the Superintendent of Public Instruction on how I can be helpful as a governor, and all of you on specific measures that I can as governor make to make sure that we are addressing those issues in the classroom. Because, look, all those issues you mentioned, right, are, number one, it's basic, it's the right thing to do, right, for those individuals. And number 2, it'll help that kid thrive in the classroom. If they are in a classroom setting, if they're in a school setting where they're treated at the most basic level, right, with respect, with dignity, and that their rights are protected. And look forward to working on that issue.
Thanks, Bob. And I neglected to mention that question came from Hawthorne Deeds Phillipson. She's a member of the Sumner Bonnie Lake Education Association and a foreign language and literature teacher at Bonnie Lake High School.
Awesome.
Our 5th question comes from Erin McKenzie from the Seattle Education Association. She's a social studies teacher at Ingram High School and relates to revenue. Mm-hmm. Middle and low income families pay 8 to 17% of their income in taxes, while the wealthiest pay just 3%. What will you do to support fixing our upside-down tax code and continue to raise progressive revenue?
Awesome. Thanks, Aaron. Right, Aaron, for
Aaron.
that question. Well, first, I agree with the premise of the question. Right? We do have an upside-down tax. You and I've talked about this, right? That this is a inequity that we have in our system, that where folks like you are paying more proportionally, right, than the wealthiest in our society. That doesn't make any sense. Number two, in order to address that, I've been supportive. Typically, as Attorney General, I don't weigh in as Attorney General on sort of revenue decisions by the legislature, right? That's not exactly my bailiwick, right? But I've made exceptions for things like the capital gains tax that the state legislature, right, proposed and adopted. I said, no, I'm going to actually publicly support that. It's that important, right, for the work that's being done, but also to address what Aaron's getting at, right, which is greater equity in our system. Also supported publicly the tax on big, large out-of-state banks that make huge amounts of revenues. Publicly supported that. And by the way, proud of my team, we successfully defended both of those revenue streams from the inevitable legal challenges that come to those that went all the way to the state Supreme Court. So really got behind those. And so as governor, I think the key is to continue to find what I would consider to be proposals like that, capital gains taxes that I think make sense, that we are very specific on where those revenues are going to go. If taxes are being raised anywhere, I think one key thing for a governor is to use that bully pulpit to communicate to the people exactly how those dollars are going to be used and then deliver on that. I think the capital gains tax is a really good example of that. I think it's supported by a majority of Washingtonians because the legislature did exactly that, and folks like yourself and others communicated who does this really impact, who does it not impact, and where are these resources going to go, and then making sure we deliver on where those resources are going to go. And so that's the philosophy that I would take as governor on making sure that we address that issue and use revenues we bring in to address all the issues we're talking about, right? This is a priority for me, that this is the type of revenue streams that go to the types of programs and funding and salaries that we're talking about today.
Well, Bob, our sixth question comes from Penny Kramer. She's in the room.
Awesome.
Tacoma
All right.
Penny is from Tacoma,
Great.
and she is the local and council president in Tacoma, and Penny is right over there in the second row on the end.
Wonderful.
And Penny's question relates to SEL and ESAs. And as our students struggle to cope with the long-term mental and behavioral impacts of the pandemic, schools don't have enough nurses, counselors, school psychologists, and other professionals to help them. How would you help to increase staffing levels for this category of educators, educational staff associates?
Sure. So thanks, Penny, for the question. And look, there is no more important role in a classroom setting than exactly those folks, the nurses and other individuals who are playing such a key role for students. And so I think this is also related to the earlier question I think that we asked about issues we have with behavior in classrooms as well, where again, for the state to make sure that we are, to address the staffing issues, make sure that we are putting the resources behind that so those positions can be filled, that there's an adequate salary behind those, and we're putting those folks in the classrooms to make sure that there's adequate staffing for this increasing need that we're seeing every single day in our schools with students across the board. And so, again, I think this gets back to, as a governor, having the power to propose those budgets that reflect the staffing shortages that are going on, the salaries that are not high enough for too many folks, right? All of those issues are going to be reflected in my budget as a governor. The other thing I'll say is that these issues with those employees specifically came up in our conversations frequently, right? And how important those jobs are, the lack of staffing for those, and making sure that the state reflects that in our budgeting process. And so as a governor, that is, I want to be as clear as I can be on that the state's facing many challenges right now, right? Let me put it this way, actually, Larry. So I'm often asked how I make decisions, right? And I think I've still got time, so good. So I often say that in my job, I have some challenging decisions. Fair enough. Okay, fair enough.
As long as there's no objections.
So I'm often asked how I make decisions, because some of my decisions I make are challenging, right? They're not always easy. And so what I often say is that sort of the more, and this will be true as governor, there's a lot of competing challenges on where revenue goes and where we're going to put it as a state. I don't need to tell you that, you know all that. So what I find, the way I make decisions, is the more challenging a decision gets in my current job, what I try to do is make that decision as simple as possible, which may seem a little counterintuitive, but I've really come to believe, Larry, that in decisions that I have to make in my job, that there's always a sort of key kernel, sort of a North Star, there's a key kernel of truth in any decision. And there's often just a lot of stuff coming at you, right, and considerations, but there's something basic, true, core to any big decision I've got to make. So that's how I approach these decisions. So as governor, right, on issues like this, on budgets, oh my God, right? Billions and billions of dollars, right? Well, how do you decide? How do you prioritize? Well, I guess for me, it may seem simple, but I think this is the key to making good decisions is what is the most core thing for the state, right? What is the most key thing for the state? What's the North Star for the state, right? And when I think about funding, well, kids, right? I mean, I don't know, does it get more core than that, right? The future of our state. Those kids, we have a duty to those kids to make sure on all the things that we're touching on here that we are adequately funding, from special education to the nurses to all these issues, adequately funding that. And that to me just seems core, basic. Our state constitution says, right, paramount duty of the state. It's in our constitution, for God's sakes, right? So to me, that is fundamental in how I would approach a decision-making process on putting together a budget.
Thank you. The last question that we have this morning is on the educator shortage, and this comes from Ann Dame. She is a member of the Shoreline Education Association, and she's a library media specialist at Einstein Middle School.
Great.
Persistent shortages across all job roles in education, coupled with high burnout and an insufficient traditional pipeline for educators, have created widespread staffing crises. How will you help to address these issues?
I think that Ann, right? Is that right, Ann?
Yes.
Yeah, thanks for that question, Ann. So I think the answer is similar to sort of previous questions, right? That we have these staffing shortages across the board in key areas in our schools, in our classrooms all across the state. And so one thing I haven't said, but I would also go without saying for these earlier questions is making sure I'm working with your leadership, with all of you on how we can best do that. Number two, I think we were maybe chatting earlier before I came in the room here, is that as Attorney General, sometimes we work on a task force that touches on education policy, school safety, for example, right? It's not a lot, but sometimes we do, that we're asked by legislature to work on something. I make sure that my staff understands that anytime we're doing that a WEA member is a part of that group, okay? Because it's going to impact your work, right? That not just sort of just a person who's got some familiarity with issues. No, a WEA member is a part of that group, right? So that voice is heard. So on all of these issues like this is making sure that as a state, as a governor, when we're having those conversations, right, that we have your voice in the room on how best to address those staffing shortages, and making sure, I think a key really is to make sure we are communicating to legislators who adopt that budget, right? A governor proposes it, but that legislature they're the group that actually adopt that, and they make changes to all budgets, right? And then the governor's tools are more limited. A veto at the end is what's available. So I think making sure that we are making sure that legislators understand the depths of the staffing challenges in the way that Ann's mentioning, and making sure that that is reflected in the budget to make sure we're addressing that, putting resources for that, when we make those hires, pay those folks the right kind of wages, they don't suffer that burnout, right? Short staffing, folks get burned out. I saw that in my office with attorneys, folks leaving, attorneys who are there doing work on behalf of kids sometimes, for example, who sometimes can be removed from a home where there's abuse or neglect. Those attorneys were ridiculously overworked, and we were losing them in insane numbers, right? Not because they didn't want to do the work, not enough attorneys doing it, not enough professional staff doing it, not getting paid enough. It's a similar story, right? And so the way that, again, that I resolved that was personal engagement on that issue. Because I realized it was so core to what we were doing, and the morale of the office being impacted, the impact on those kids around the state was being impacted, that some decisions, some choices require the AG or the governor to be personally involved in those things. And this would be a category that I would include in that area.
Well, thanks, Bob. As I said, that was our final question.
Okay.
You have a couple of minutes.